So first things first, Thomas P. Miller and Associates, we're now TPMA. We're a national leader in driving transformative workforce, education, and economic development. For over 36 years now, we've partnered with communities and organizations to translate complex data into actionable strategies that create real, measurable impact. We're currently working everywhere from Humboldt County, California, all the way to Volusia County, Florida, and everywhere in between. What's Smart Take with TPMA? Well, we get it. You're busy. We're busy. That's why we've created this quick webinar series that respects your time and to deliver an essential industry insight in about 30 minutes. So, good afternoon, everyone. I am Zachary Rice. With 25 years of economic development, government affairs, and public policy experience, I've previously worked in the telecommunication industry. I represented a national trade association. I developed some industry self-regulatory standards. I also worked down in the Dominican Republic when it became the network access point for fiber for the Caribbean. Besides me, you're going to hear from Jonathan Ferris. Jonathan joined TPMA in 2005. So over the last 2 decades, he's worked on a variety of projects from economic development plans for cities to workforce development strategies for entire regions with clients across more than 15, probably pushing 20 states now. You're also going to hear from Brian Nottingham. He has about 30 years of experience, and he's kind of our data guru. His work has included everything from economic impact studies for major universities to, I don't know, analyzing the future needs of the workforce across the country. So that's who you'll be hearing from today. So let's just hop over and talk about why we're here. Oops, that didn't go forward, did it? So I think we all know that over the past few years, data centers they've basically gone from being an industry term to front page news. They're now at the center of conversations about economic development, technology, and even community planning. As the world has become increasingly digital, the demand for data storage and computing power has skyrocketed. ChatGPT, your AI models, your banking apps, your cloud-based photos, and even this video call is funneled through a data center. Almost every part of our daily life runs through data centers, so big that they could power a small city. So what we're seeing is they are real life cathedrals of the digital age. Now, when we talk about communities considering data centers often hear two very different narratives. On one side, you have, the proponents talk to you about new jobs, expanded tax revenue, infrastructure investment. On the other side, you have residents that worry about environmental footprint, water and energy use, land consumption, and potential changes to quality of life. Both sides raise valid points, which makes critical for local leaders to have the right information before making any decision. And that's why we're here today. So today, the goal isn't just to make the case for or against data centers. Instead, we're here to equip you with the knowledge and tools you need to evaluate whether a data center is the right fit for your community. We'll look at national and regional trends, walk through some key questions leaders should be asking, review how economic impact modeling works, and finish with some next steps and how to move forward with confidence. With that said, let's look at the big picture really quickly. So we've done the welcome. Also, before we jump in, chat has been disabled, but questions, if you have any questions, please put that in the question area and we'll answer those all toward the end. We'll have a couple of minutes for that. All right, well, let's jump into this really quickly. Obviously, there's been a huge movement across the country and what it means for communities like ours. This is just a visualization of the exponential growth and the power usage since 2013 to 2025. You've seen a huge increase since 2017, but the annual growth is about 17.7%, when you look at that, what's causing that? This is big business. You can see year over year the revenue from cloud-based services has just keep increasing. In return, since revenues are increasing, the investments are growing. And some of the players that we'll probably not specifically talk about, but Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Oracle. So just 2 days ago, I came across JLL's new report on data centers. And get this, from today until 2030, they're projecting a $1 trillion investment in data centers over the next 5 years. That's ginormous. Where are they going? So the hub, the Silicon Valley of data centers is Northern Virginia. So that's why you see that big circle around Virginia. But you also see some other ones scattered through. You'll see Chicago, Atlanta. We have some over on the West Coast, Texas. So to put these circles into reality, here's the numbers. Virginia currently has 305 data centers, 99 under construction, and they have 400 announced. Same with Texas. I mean, they have a 311 announced, 185, 85. You can see the numbers, but to point out a few, Illinois has a lot in the pipeline. Georgia has a lot in the pipeline. Pennsylvania even has a pretty good pipeline right now. Now, what we're seeing is there's the primary markets, which we're talking about, and then emerging markets and secondary markets. Where we're seeing a huge push are those secondary markets right there. Okay. So wanted to talk really quick. So we're going to be talking about data centers for the next few minutes. Wanted to talk about DeKalb County, Illinois. So in 2020, they created a relationship. An announcement was made with Meta and their data center. And in 2023, it was launched. So we've been able to do a little bit of research and we've met with a lot of folks. I'm not going to dig into all of the details because I don't want to steal some thunder from Brian about capital investment, construction jobs like that. But what I want to mention is the social impact that they've had since launching in 2023. They've actually given out about 65 plus grants for over $1.2 million, which has gone to education, library, and a ton of other local initiatives. And that's probably one of the reasons that countless number of elected officials and community leaders love the relationship that they have with Meta in their community. Just in the last week or so, I've spoken with two key stakeholders in the region, and they had nothing bad to say about the relationship. So this is a positive story. I know we get there's a lot of negative narrative out there, but if your community is interested in data centers, this is a model to where it's a win-win. The community's super happy to have them there, and the company is super happy to be there. Now, with that said, let's talk about some of the questions that you'll need to ask. I'm going to throw this over to Jonathan Ferris.
Thanks, Zach. When we see data center projects, you probably are looking at headlines and seeing some negative trends. So there's planning commissions, county commissioners, there's been votes that have turned down these projects. So we're in a spot where we're giving you resources to think about what you could do to be better engaged, make your residents better informed, and really have a better approach to getting into this market. So economic developers will have a lot of projects in their pipeline right now that are focused on data centers. What we have discussed and what we're seeing as maybe a gap right now are communities that are really thinking about how they can engage before there's a project or an announcement, really thinking about what they can do to get organized so they have a better approach to understanding what they should do with data centers. So we frame this as what are the type of questions that should be asked. And I think it is a really helpful way for communities to get that discussion going. So just in terms of an organization perspective, that group itself could involve economic development leaders, it could involve education workforce partners, organizations, neighborhood groups. I mean, making sure all the people that might be informed and really part of this, having them part of that discussion becomes really important. So we would encourage you all, if you don't have something like that, think about getting a group organized to just start having that discussion, because data centers are here, you're getting requests. I think if you can get the conversation going before you have these votes that are out there, that you have a better way of knowing what could work or not work for your community. So we've broken this down into 5 areas. First is economic impact. So really understanding what that might look like, what you're going to get in terms of tax income that could come from the center, what that might look like for jobs. You have both the construction jobs, but then you have the long-term jobs that would be available. And then thinking about what other benefits might be in play. So Zach mentioned some from the example we shared. There are public services that could be improved, that could be first responders, also things related to education, workforce, even some environmental amenities that might be in play. So understanding what that looks like and what you could potentially get out of the project, and really thinking about what you want to get out of the project. Other area would be looking at environmental impacts. You have natural resources that are going to be needed for these centers. If it's water, there's a lot of discussion around electricity. So knowing what those demands might look like, what you have available, really having that information at your fingertips, and knowing what really is there and what the facts are, what's real, and having a better case for what that environmental impact will look like. Workforce demand becomes really important. You have jobs that are going to be created. I think knowing how those jobs can be met as communities, I think where we've seen success is when communities are engaged with that developer who's actually building the facility and thinking about how they can hire locally. We've even seen it where they have programs that are incorporating apprenticeships, where they bring in individuals within the community that are getting trained up through that process. So thinking about how that could be embedded in what's there, how you're having programs that are aligned with what the training aspect would look like for individuals that would be hired on a long-term basis for positions at those data centers. So incredibly important. Then thinking about quality of life, is this facility going to be, in a spot where it might be protected? There's a barrier around it. You have trees around it. Again, not necessarily what they're asking for, what you want. What are the things that would make the most sense, align with what your community needs? I'll keep saying that. What does your community want? Thinking about what it would lay out if you get a data center project, what those requirements would be to have you in the best possible space. So there's just a lot of things that could get into that. There's benefits that could be had from investments of what that center brings, but just also thinking about what that might look like to have it in a design in a way that it's positioned that's not going to necessarily hinder some of the other things that you might have going within your communities. And I think the last, it kind of plays into everything I mentioned, but just some way you have transparency. Folks understand that there is this project that could happen or projects that could happen. We completely understand NDAs. We understand some of the things that can't be shared about what a company would be, but I think getting the word out about it's on the horizon and what you can do to be better informed is incredibly important. So I know some of this you're probably saying, yeah, it's common sense, but I think we're just wanting folks to think of it in a more organized and concerted effort to think about how they're gathering this information, keeping everybody informed, and really thinking about how your community can be on the offense rather than being in a reactive state. So I am going to pass over to Brian. He's going to explain more on the economic impact side and how we have seen these analysis put together, and just some things you should think about when you're thinking about what that return on the investment would be.
It's great. Thanks, Jonathan. So when we start talking about economic impact analysis, we really feel that this is an important component of any due diligence going into a project, especially more and more often we see communities competing for these data centers. So you'll put together an incentive package and put together some tax breaks. Perhaps you have to invest in some infrastructure. Perhaps you have to, make other concessions. It's really good to get an idea of what the payback's going to be on the back end. And it's very, we really pride ourselves as being honest brokers. So we would utilize really multiple software packages. The example you see here in front of us, we just did with Lightcast, down and dirty, easy economic impact analysis. But we also use Implan software as well that really digs into the nitty gritty and breaks out what these impacts could be, what they should be, and where the gap might exist. So one of the first things I just really want to call out when you're thinking about the potential economic impact of bringing a data center to your community is really differentiating between the initial, and I'm going to use that word differently here in a second, but focusing on the construction, the building, the components that go into putting this data center together. It can be a big number. You can see from this example, when we figure out that what the average sort of construction would be, if you're supporting 700 workers, it has a ripple effect that impacts 895 people in the community. That's for your construction phase. And that's going to generate a lot of income, a lot of general tax revenue, both in terms of income, also permitting. There could also be some sales tax. These folks spend their dollars in the community. That's your big initial wave, which oftentimes is kind of where communities might stop because it's eye-popping. But it's important to also consider the long-term implications and the long-term economic impact of these centers. Now, they don't always employ a lot of people. Some of the bigger ones might have 500 or more, but a lot of these smaller ones might only have an average of 50 workers, which was what we used in this example. So over time, that economic impact might be a little bit less as you continue to operate throughout the center. And again, as Jonathan and Zach have been good to sort of call out, and I'll just repeat, we're agnostic. We want to be honest brokers here. We want to help you and get you these real numbers and prepare so you can make a really informed decision. So what is an acceptable economic impact? Well, that's entirely up to you and your community to determine in concert on whether the juice is worth the squeeze, to put it in slightly different terms. But when we do this economic impact analysis in the higher level, more general terms of how we go about it, there's several components you need to be kind of mindful of. And really the analogy I use is probably played out. These guys have heard it many times. Maybe some of you have had to listen to me talk about this before too, but we think about it as really like if you're at a lake and you throw a rock in the middle of the lake, like being a kid or even a kid at heart, go out and toss a rock into a lake, that big initial splash, that's going to be the direct initial impact of this center. But however, after you toss that rock in the lake, the ripples keep folding out. So it has sort of a multiplier effect. In fact, that's exactly what we call it, the multiplier effect. So when you do an economic impact analysis, we want to account both for the people that are employed directly, that is at the data center, or as part of the construction company that's building the center. Then we want to take a look at the indirect jobs that are supported as well. These are your supply chain jobs, the first ripple out from that initial tossing of the rock, so to speak. So everything from concrete to steel to transportation to even back office real estate, administrative support. All of these end up in a company's supply chain. And through the course of building the center or later on operating the center, they're going to continue doing this business with other businesses in their supply chain that supports additional economic activity within a community. And then after that, you can really break it down. And depending on which model you use, you can actually look at the suppliers, the supply chain, really unwieldy term to use, but regardless, I think it captures what we're talking about. And that's another potential level as well. So rippling that out one step further. But the one common measure that's always included in these models, regardless of the software package used, is the induced impact. So what happens when people that are working in the data centers, once it's up and running, or construction workers that are getting a paycheck to build the data center, what happens when they spend these paychecks in the community? Well, of course, they're going to support additional jobs, be it at the local Starbucks, local fast food establishment, anything you can think of, rent, it all goes into it. As folks spend their hard-earned dollars in the community, that's going to support additional jobs. So that's the wider sort of last ripple, and I guess in the analogy of tossing a rock in the lake. So it's very important you account for all of these things. And that's really what we would go about, is trying to make sure that it was very detailed and clear on what the economic impact could be, not just now, but into the future as well. Finally, the other thing I want to mention is taxes. Clearly, if you've got a public interest, if you're representing a public organization, you're going to be very interested in the economic impact in terms of tax dollars. So there's several ways we can estimate that as well. We talk about TOPI quite a bit. That's tax on production and imports. So that's things like building taxes, taxes to support fire districts, for example, special tax categories, also taxes on imports, which is a hot topic right now. We can very happily sidestep, but that tax impact could be much larger than it was in years past if we're going to start taxing all these imports that go into building a data center. So that's one aspect of it. But the other thing we really take a close look at when we do these type of analyses are also the income taxes being generated. Work with a state like Indiana or Kentucky, where you've got the wonderful flat income tax rates, very straightforward process to calculate what that long-term sort of revenue would be for the state from these jobs that are being created. So those are the two buckets we try to break out whenever we look at this tax impact, but it can get much more complicated than that. Newer updates and newer versions now within the implant software package, and it's something we use quite often, can actually estimate the environmental impact of doing this type of work. What does it mean in terms of emissions? What does it mean for energy consumption? What does it mean for all of the things that might not necessarily be a positive that go with the opportunity here? So I think it's important that we lay out all of this upfront to give you all the information you need so you and your community can make an informed decision. So now listen, I could talk about economic impact all day, but this is really not the point of the discussion here. So I'm going to flip it back over to Zach to bring us home and wrap this up.
Woo! All right. Well, before we wrap up, I want to thank you all. Economic developers, workforce leaders, policymakers, educators, business leaders, business partners. I think we had a wide range of attendees on today's call. So thank you for taking time to join us for this conversation. Data centers are just not an infrastructure decision. Just from the number of attendees and the breadth that we have, I mean, they touch workforce pipelines, they touch local business ecosystems, they touch public resources and community identity. Our goal today was to give you a clear framework for thinking about these types of opportunities. And at the end of the day, every community is unique. There's no one size fits all answer. The most important thing is that leaders have the right information, they ask the right questions, and they engage openly with residents and stakeholders. So, and this is kind of the process that every community will have to go through, evaluate, engage, model, decide. But again, every community is at a different stage in their journey. So we wanted to leave you with this. If you're in the early stages, like the early stage, bring together your local leaders, utilities, education partners, and community voices to begin the conversation about this. Now, let's say if you're a little further along, you'll need credible data to weigh costs, benefits, and trade-offs. Then again, as discussions progress, we would recommend align on a clear narrative for your community, one that reflects both the opportunities and the challenges. So that's really what we wanted to leave you with. How can TPMA help? TPMA's role is to help you navigate that process. We providing data, analysis, and facilitation so you can make a decision that aligns with your community's values and long-term goals. We hope you found this Smart Take session insightful. We do have a blog post that will be coming out soon or has already been released, and we're currently developing a white paper on data centers that will help explore best practices, challenges, and solutions in a little greater detail. We're also working on maybe a panel discussion focused on overcoming obstacles in data center developments. So, long story short, how can you get involved? If you're interested in the white paper or a panel discussion or another, we could do another 30-minute short take on something very specific, please let us know. If you need a resource or guidance, please contact us to learn how, we can help your organization explore some of these opportunities. All right. With that said, that rounds out the agenda. And it looks like maybe we can take some questions, or we can throw out some questions.
Yeah, Zach, we have a couple questions that have come through, so I think we can go through the ones that came through the chat. There was a question
Cool.
specifically related to workforce development, job creation, and how can the community use the development of a center for like the construction jobs as a pipeline to careers, and then what the permanent jobs would look like. So I think the permanent jobs, as we've looked at the data that's available, and just understanding through conversations we've had, there's really three primary buckets. You have technical and engineering roles. That could be individuals who are really technicians that are looking at the inside equipment within that data center. Network engineers that are looking at the design and ongoing, just updating of what that looks like, and then electrical engineers on it. You also have facilities and maintenance positions, so making sure everything, is running effectively, the ability to make sure that, the equipment is there and on time. And then you have support and administrative functions. And that could be, coordinators, IT specialists that are involved with it. We've also seen jobs related to security that are part of it. So that would get to that 50, 100, and, the more space you've had, we've seen some that have significant number of jobs. The DeKalb example has, I think there are over 250 people now at that center. From a construction job perspective, we have looked at what it might mean for having an apprenticeship program that would be in place. So we have seen a successful example where the company that was really the construction lead for it all was incorporating in. They had their workforce, they had all the individuals who were doing the jobs, but bringing in a set number of apprentices that were training on those positions. And they were locally hired. They were working with local training providers. It's community college or career and technical education, a CTE center. In both of those cases, they would be trained up, working through that project over 1, 2, whatever the year period. But then they have the opportunity to be working for that company as they get other projects. So it's kind of an entry point where they would start on this project and then dive into other areas. So I hope that helps answer your question. Zach, Brian, anything else to add on that one? Okay. And then we had a really...
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, the only thing I was going to say, so you did a good job of operation. So the construction jobs are tricky too. Don't let Brian fool you, because you have to have general contractors, electricians, HVACs. There's probably 6 NAICS codes of different construction employees that you have to add in to get it correct. So besides that, I think that, yeah, we answered the question you did also. Yeah.
And then there was one more localized here in Central Indiana. Someone was asking about a project in Marion County where Indianapolis is based. We don't have any inside knowledge on that. I think we're seeing articles just as the person mentioned on it. So I don't think we can comment on that at this point. Someone mentioned past projects where construction companies, primarily private or union. Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the part of the country. We have seen, union for some of the positions that Zach just mentioned, electrical union jobs. So I think it's really dependent on some of the state laws and some of the setups that they might have there. I think in both cases, there's opportunities for engagement on some of these workforce pipelines that would be in place. And then the last one we had was, how common is it for upstream and downstream businesses and end users to locate near data centers? I'm going to kick that to Brian. I've got some thoughts, but Brian, as he looks back at me, but
I can't speak to that specifically. I'll be clear. I don't want to try to fake my way through it. But I will say that we've seen a lot of really, onshoring was a popular word some time ago, but we are seeing supply chains shorten up across the country. And this is really no different if we think about that with the suppliers and what might be involved. Now, I don't know about the end users and how they locate, especially when a lot of this shows up in the cloud. I don't think you necessarily have to be in the geographic proximity of the data center to utilize it. But I will say that any suppliers that we're seeing that might need for day-to-day operations, equipment, materials, things of that nature, we are seeing a trend towards greater onshoring and certainly shorter supply chains to minimize some of the disruptions that we saw throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't know if that's super helpful or exactly what you were driving at, but that's my answer. If you want to reach out to me via email, I can dig a little bit deeper and get you a more informed response.
Yeah, and it's 2:30, so we're gonna have to log off in 10 seconds because we promised to stay 30 minutes. But I will say for the upstream or downstream businesses, what we're seeing data centers, we are seeing property values increase within a 2-mile radius just because of the infrastructure investment alone, and secondary businesses are moving in. I know in at least Virginia, I know 2 of the projects in Ohio and Illinois, other businesses are moving into those areas just because of the updated infrastructure. Again, I want to get you out of here. Thank you so much for joining today. We want to be done at 2:30. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, our contact information is on, it should have been on the screen, but have a wonderful day and reach out to us if you have any additional questions. Thank you so much.